We live in Treaty 4 territory, the original lands of the Cree, Saulteaux bands of the Ojibwe people, Assiniboine, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. Swift Current Museum would like to thank the City of Swift Current and SaskCulture Sask Lotteries for supporting programs like this. While it may be simplistic to define a person by their occupation, people, when asked what they do, talk primarily about their job. How have jobs changed in the last century? What jobs no longer exist? What jobs exist now that did not exist 100 years ago? During Swift Current's formative years, there were trainmen, ranchers, and homesteaders, as well as a handful of stores. As the town grew, opportunities arose for workers to provide an increasing number of services for the population. By 1913, there were 204 occupations listed in the Henderson's directory, ranging from accountants to yardmen. Some people were listed simply as helpers, while others had titles such as city draftsman, excavation contractor, and finisher. There were many occupations that we would expect to see today, such as barber, dentist, machinist, physician, and principal. But there were some occupations that do not exist today, and some have evolved to become something very different. There are some jobs that no longer exist. Billiards was an extremely popular game in the late 19th century and early 20th century. The game required someone to keep score of the match and to keep the drinks fresh. Today, manual scorekeeping is not necessary. Dining rooms employed people to clean and polish silver cutlery and serving dishes. While it is possible that people still clean silver in high-end hotels or private wealthy households, it is unlikely that they only polish silver. This is the dining room of the Alexandra Hotel. They advertised for a silver polisher. Stagecoach drivers used to transport mail, people, and goods for longer distances. The Northwest Mounted Police used to ride shotgun on stagecoaches and wagons traveling the Battleford Trail. Today we would call them bus drivers if we still had long-distance bus service. The box mangle consisted of a heavy frame containing a large box filled with rocks resting on a series of long wooden rollers. Damp laundry was laid flat under rollers or wound around the rollers. One or two people pulled on levers or turned cranks to move the heavy box back and forth over the rollers in order to press smooth household linen and clothing. Mangling presses the fiber ends back onto the fiber so that clothes remain clean longer and household dust is reduced. Later, a mangle was used for wringing out water from washing. The electric washing machine spin cycle rendered this use of a mangle obsolete. Mangles are still essential to commercial laundries. They are used to press large flat items and are quicker and more energy efficient than a dryer for removing water. A large commercial laundry might have somebody operating a mangling machine, but the job description mangler is gone. In the early 1900s, young men were hired to set up bowling pins. The job went like this. The bowler would roll his first ball. After it hit the pins, the pin setter would jump into the pit, clear the dead wood, the down pins, off the lane, and roll the ball back to the bowler. After the bowler's second roll, the pin setter would gather all the pins as quickly as he could, set up on a pin bar to raise small metal spikes that aligned the pins, then set them and roll the ball back to the bowler again. The city had a timekeeper whose job it was to maintain and monitor employee work schedules, as well as approving and overseeing payroll. Today we have employees who take care of payroll using timesheets, but there is no time clock. When people used ice boxes for refrigeration, they purchased ice from ice cutters or from ice delivery men who came around weekly. Ice cutters here went out onto the creek. Shallow, slow-moving water was best because it formed solid, clear ice. A horse-drawn plow cleared any snow, which warmed the ice and slowed the freezing process. Ice cutters first scored the ice into sections, then cut it nearly through with a horse-drawn device. They made the final cuts by hand. Blocks of ice were floated to a spot where they could be removed and delivered. Ice was harvested this way well into the 1930s, when mechanical refrigeration became the norm. We had honey wagoneers. Before the community had sewers, someone had the occupation of driving around collecting buckets of bathroom waste. Parts of Swift Current depended on the honey wagon until the early 1960s. Swift Current had a telegrapher, otherwise known as a telegraphist or telegraph operator. The telegraphist was one of the very first high-technology professions of the modern era. Morse code was used to transmit messages across the country and ultimately across the ocean. These messages were translated and typed for delivery. The last large telegraph system closed in 2013. By the late 1980s, fax machines began taking over the quick message market. Fun fact, the fax machine was invented in 1843. Watchmakers were master craftsmen who built all the parts for the watches they made. Today, watches are factory made. Modern watchmakers generally repair watches. Another early occupation was the milkman. Milk delivery was common into the 1960s. People would leave their empty bottles on the porch, and the milkman would leave their standing order. The advancement of refrigeration meant that milk delivery was not needed every day. When more women entered the workforce, delivered milk could be left standing unrefrigerated all day. Milk available from grocery stores was also more affordable because the cost of delivery was eliminated. Here you can see the rack for hanging the milk bottles. We also had typesetters. Printers, like newspapers, had to physically set letters, which were inked and placed in a press to create printed matter. Today, printing is done digitally. We also had film projectionists. When film was used for movies, a projectionist was needed to operate the projector and change reels when necessary. There were also illicit occupations. Rum running was big business in the late 20s and early 30s. Prohibition in Saskatchewan ended in 1924, but the United States continued to prohibit alcohol until 1933. There was plenty of money to be made transporting rum across the border. Swift Current had two houses of recreation, one on the south side and one on the north side. The ladies were respected customers in local stores because they had plenty of money. The north side house of recreation did not close until the early 60s. We also had opium dens, which were often operated in conjunction with early restaurants. There are jobs that did not exist in 1913 and also do not exist today, like the video store clerk. In 1980s, the video rental stores were the hottest new businesses on the block. These stores made a successful transition to DVDs, but streaming services made them obsolete. Cigarette girls carried trays of cigarettes to sell to customers. This occupation began in the speakeasies and supper clubs of the 1920s, before expanding to restaurants, bars, and casinos. In the 1950s, the job expanded into sporting events, theaters, and music halls in the United States. The introduction of cigarette machines in the mid-1950s eliminated the need for the position. Can you think of any other jobs that only exist for a brief period? The Henderson's Directory of 1913 demonstrates that some positions used to be described differently, but still exist in one form or another. For example, the job description of capitalist. When we think of a capitalist, we generally think of capitalism, an economic system based on market competition and the pursuit of profit. But in the late 1800s and early 1900s, capitalist was a job description that showed up in directories and censuses. A capitalist was someone who generated income from rental property, stocks and bonds, and who provided capital or invested in other firms or people. Today, we would likely call them investors. Another different job was the homestead inspector. In 1871, an order in council began a uniform land survey across the prairies. Homesteaders who filed for free land had to provide proof that the land had increased in value through additions like cultivation and building construction, costing labor and/or capital, within 3 years in order to confirm their ownership of the land. The local Dominion Lands Office sent an inspector to the property to confirm that the improvements had been made. Today, homestead inspectors seem to be the people who inspect properties before purchase. Teamsters were the men who drove horse-drawn wagons. Work was sometimes scarce, jobs were insecure, and wages were low. Teamsters assumed liability for bad accounts and damage to shipments. This changed when the Teamsters Union was formed in 1902 to address these problems. A formal Teamsters Canada was established in 1976. A stenographer transcribes speech into shorthand in real-time courtroom proceedings or academic settings. They might be called on to read back what has transpired. This information could later be transcribed into longhand or typed. Shorthand was considered an essential part of secretarial training and police work, and was useful for journalists. The stenotype machine was invented in 1879. Swift Current had 27 stenographers in 1913. As of 2016, a stenotype was still used in the Canadian Senate, while digital recording had replaced it in the House of Commons. In early Swift Current, a hack driver transported people in a horse-drawn carriage. Today's version of a hack driver would be a taxi driver. A drayman was the driver of a dray, a low flatbed wagon without sides, pulled by horses or oxen. They transported a variety of goods. Today the term is occasionally used for brewery delivery men, but primarily for highway drivers who deliver containers to and from a port. They haul ocean or rail containers. Barristers and solicitors are lawyers. The basic difference between barristers and solicitors is that a barrister mainly defends people in court, and the solicitor mainly performs legal work outside of court. Many signs in early Swift Current identify the business offices of barristers and solicitors. Today, only 2 law firms in town refer to them as barristers and solicitors. Most simply use the general term lawyer. In 1913, there were 4 druggists in Swift Current. A druggist is a person who makes and sells drugs and medicines. Druggists prepared their own compounds to fill prescriptions. They would grind dry ingredients using a mortar and pestle and measure the components with scales and beakers. Druggists had a compression device to make pills. Today, a pharmacist is trained to dispense prescription drugs in a hospital or retail pharmacy. They may put together ointments and salves. There are far more medicines available today, and pharmacists are tasked with knowing about their side effects and how they react with other drugs. Pharmacies take in far more prescriptions than early druggists. They need to double check that patients are receiving the prescribed drug in the correct dose. A store or counter clerk is responsible for selling goods or services at a business. In 1913, customers provided a list of the items they wished to purchase, and a clerk pulled them from the shelves. If a customer in a department store wished to see something, like a pair of gloves, the clerk would take the item from a glass case. Woolworths, which opened in Swift Current in 1917, was the first store where merchandise was readily available to customers without the assistance of a clerk. This photo shows clerks from the first Woolworths store in Swift Current. Today, store clerks perform the same duties, but the job title has become sales associate. Today, footwear is manufactured in factories. Early Swift Current had boot makers who would custom make footwear for their clients. The position of Dominion meteorologist was available to people whose political leaning aligned with the party in power. Today, a 4-year Bachelor of Science degree in meteorology or atmospheric sciences is required. Meteorologists use data from all over the world to create a forecast for their region. They may also work for government agencies or specialize in atmospheric research or climatology. A hostler was originally a person who tended horses at an inn. In Swift Current in 1913, hostlers worked for the CPR, moving locomotives in and out of the roundhouse. Today, hostlers continue to work in the railroad industry, moving engines in and out of service facilities. The title also refers to truck drivers who direct trucks and tractors to park at docking areas. In 1913, a wiper was a junior position with the CPR. The wiper was responsible for polishing everything made of brass in the train. Today, wipers hold the most junior position on ships. They clean engine spaces and machinery and are apprentices for the position of oiler. In 1913, the brakeman ran across the top of the train while it was in motion, manually turning on the brakes for each car. Today, the brakeman or trainman is responsible for the electronic end-of-train device. They also have responsibility for protecting the train, which means flagging behind and ahead whenever the train is exposed to collision. On steam engines, the fireman stoked the fire and maintained steam pressure in the boiler. Once diesel engines came into use, the fireman was the engineer's helper, watching the track and signals and relaying signals from the trainmen. He was also an apprenticeship for the position of engineer. This position has only recently been eliminated. Early switchboard workers had to manually connect callers on a switchboard by plugging phone lines into the correct circuit. Today, a switchboard operator works for major companies, hospitals, and hotels, where many telephone calls are coming in. The operators of today are more customer service driven. Many businesses have replaced this position with a recording that tells how to reach specific people. Early tinsmiths made a variety of things, including pails, basins, scoops, and candle sconces. They even made headstones, as seen here. Tinsmiths sealed their joints and seams with solder that was half tin and half lead. The lead component would not be acceptable for food or water containers today, but we still have tinsmiths. HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning companies, still have tinsmiths to create the ductwork, which is screwed together. The job of housewife was not listed in the Henderson's directory. Women passed from the control of their father to that of their husband. A husband's permission was needed for a wife to engage in business or administer or sell property which she had owned before marriage. Widows were listed as an occupation in 1913. Women were not allowed to file for a homestead unless they were a widow with dependent children. Women in Saskatchewan earned the right to vote in 1916, but into the 1950s, women were expected to serve the needs of their husband. Today, one parent or the other often opts to stay at home when they have 2 or more children because childcare uses up too much of a second income. While we have many more conveniences than housewives of 1913, the job of stay-at-home is still 24/7 caretaker, mediator, entertainment director, cook, launderer, cleaner, early education provider, and medic. There are occupations that did not exist then, but do now, such as public relations. There were town boosters in early Swift Current, including a group who sent a baseball team on tour to the United States. The team promoted Swift Current in all the communities they visited. Public relations was introduced to the private sector in the US in the 1920s. People who work in public relations are in the business of telling stories to persuade their audience about the strengths and reputation of a business or organization. They spread positive messages through a variety of media. They create press releases, write speeches and pitches, create special events for public outreach, conduct market research, and expand business contacts. They do not buy ads or give out free samples. They are essentially image shapers. And also the TV or radio host. Radio did not come to Saskatchewan until 1923. Television first came to Swift Current in 1957. Early radio and television hosts did much of their work live, including sponsors' ads. Today, many radio station hosts do not talk much other than to read local news, conducting the odd interview, and promoting contests. Much of their content is pre-programmed. Stations like CBC have hosts on talk shows and hosts who discuss the music that they are playing. And some TV shows continue to have hosts. We now have the occupation of pet groomer. People used to groom their own pets, if in fact they were groomed at all. Wealthy people likely had household staff who were responsible for keeping their pets clean. Today there are numerous pet groomers who offer washing, nail care, ear cleaning, hair brushing, and trimming. There were no positions for occupational health and safety in 1913, and little safety gear for workers. Workers' health became a labor-related issue during the Industrial Revolution, initially restricting working hours for children. The Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety, an agency of the Government of Canada, was created in 1966 by an Act of Parliament. The Act was based on the belief that all Canadians had a fundamental right to a healthy and safe working environment. Today, we have both provincial and federal labor codes for various sectors. Mining, transportation, and federal employment are under federal jurisdiction, while all other workers are covered by provincial labor codes. Although the first commercial airline flight took place in 1914, there were no pilots here at that time. Swift Current has pilots today, but they operate private aircraft. A&W founded the first ever chain restaurant in America in 1919. Kentucky Fried Chicken, Kurt's takeout and catering service, opened in Swift Current in the 1960s and opened a second location on the new Trans-Canada Highway in 1970. Today we have at least 13 restaurant franchises in town. The creation of an emergency medical technician occurred in the early 1970s in response to a report that noted that accidental injuries were the leading cause of death. Initial paramedics didn't have experienced staff members to guide them, and the emergency physician as we know it today didn't exist. Interestingly, the expectation of advanced level care on the streets was fueled by the TV show Emergency. The profession of nurse practitioner began in the U.S. in 1965 in response to a shortage of doctors in rural America. The first course in Saskatchewan was offered at U of S in 1974. In 1992, Saskatchewan Health requested that SciAst Wascana Institute develop a program in advanced clinical nursing. Educational assistants became common in the 1990s as more students with special needs became integrated into classrooms. The first management consulting firm was founded in 1914. Admitting that you used a consultant was rare until the mid-60s because companies feared that it would look like they were struggling. Today, people see it as adding to legitimacy, so there are consultants for most everything. Most of the new occupations today have sprung from our growing dependence on computer information technology. Software engineers and designers collect and document users' requirements and develop logical and physical specifications. They research, evaluate, and synthesize technical information to design, develop, and test computer-based systems. Programmers write code that converts the design into a set of instructions a computer can follow. Podcast producers manage, record, and edit the episodes. Software developers are the creative minds behind computer programs. Some develop the applications that allow people to do specific tasks on a computer or another device. Others develop the underlying systems that run the devices or that control networks. Drone pilots ensure that the drones are operating properly before flying. Plans for routes are created, and the pilot navigates the drones along these paths. Another new job is wind turbine technician. These people inspect, diagnose, adjust, repair, and maintain electrical, mechanical, and hydraulic equipment on a wind turbine. Some of them may help to build the turbines. Another new occupation is monitoring the self-checkout. Here the task is supposed to be between the customer and a computer, but there is usually a human standing by because the computer sometimes makes mistakes. Also, some people have figured out how to steal some of their groceries at self-checkouts. Several stores now have staff to check merchandise against receipts. There are many jobs that will not fall prey to automation. These are jobs that depend on emotional intelligence. People with emotional intelligence are self-aware, self-regulated, motivated, empathetic, and have good social skills. Psychiatrists diagnose and treat mental health problems. Psychologists provide assessment and therapeutic treatment. They must be empathetic without getting emotionally connected. Funeral or wedding planners are jobs that require grace under pressure. People need to be empathetic to the stress that their clients may be experiencing. Social workers generally work with people struggling with basic living conditions, family issues, and substance abuse problems. Observation and self-awareness are the top two skills required in this career. Observation refers to a social worker's abilities to not only listen to clients, but watch their actions and nonverbal messages to understand what is going on. Teachers and educational assistants need to be empathetic and always aware of what is going on. Their jobs have become increasingly difficult because they spend time on social issues while trying to teach. Customer service representatives must be empathetic and good listeners while maintaining the self-awareness to not take criticism personally. Human resources managers need to be able to show empathy and remain calm while not getting personally involved. Firefighters need to maintain control of situations while remaining empathetic. Occupations in the medical profession require people who are motivated and empathetic while under pressure. Occupations in the arts will not decline due to automation because AI cannot think and experience like creative people do. Police officers need to think on their feet and react to rapidly changing situations. There are jobs that will decline or become obsolete in the coming decades. The occupation of gas station attendant is disappearing. Self-serve gasoline has reduced the number of attendants, and pay at the pump reduces this need even more. Also declining are dispatchers. Computers can dispatch vehicles, so automated dispatchers will become the norm. Robot callers are replacing telemarketers. They can make more calls in less time, and you do not have to pay them by the hour. Also in decline has been the postal worker. Private companies like UPS and FedEx have already taken many clients from Canada Post, and email has become the go-to for sending letters. Automation of mail facilities is also replacing people. During the pandemic, there has been an upsurge in the use of Canada Post. The number of farmers has been declining for years as technology makes it easier for fewer people to produce more yield. Large farms have become the norm rather than the exception. Publishing and printing houses have declined. Technology has brought much printed matter into the digital realm. Newspapers are on the decline. Traditional ways of printing and publishing may well be left behind. Manufacturing workers. Factories have been automated and some have been relocated to other countries where labor is less expensive, making this a job declining in Canada. Social media professionals may find themselves looking for work. More and more, social media is being handled by its users. The skills associated with these jobs will become more commonplace than specialized. The job of sports referee might well be better suited for a robot or artificial intelligence. Sports officials already depend on clocks that measure hundredths of a second and slow down instant replays, where much of the footage is captured by drones. So it is not a stretch that a robot or artificial intelligence will eventually be used to officiate games. The number of bank tellers has been declining rapidly as more people are using ATMs and are doing their banking online. Some banks have only one service employee in the building. Most freight trains have a crew of 2 today, one conductor and one engineer. Railroad companies continue to press for reduced operating and labor costs, and this threatens to eliminate conductors. The most common jobs in Canada in 2018 were retail salespeople, retail and wholesale managers, admin assistants, food counter attendants or kitchen helpers, and cashiers. Jobs that will be in demand in 2021 will particularly include the medical profession, including doctors, nurses, physiotherapists, lab technologists, and technicians. Truck drivers have been in great demand of late during the pandemic. Their job may indeed start to decline because of automation. College, university, and vocational instructors, those who teach at college and vocational levels, are nearing retirement age, and half of those in the industry are almost 50, so this job is in great demand. Business management consultants are also needed. Businesses feel they need these consultants to maintain productivity. Welding is one of the highest paying in-demand jobs. Welders who possess fitting skills, can use a variety of techniques, and can read plans and blueprints are expected to be in the highest demand. Aerospace engineers are in great demand. As Canada's aircraft age and tighter regulations come into place, it is expected that the demand for updated aircraft will increase in the areas of research, design, development, installation, testing, and maintenance. Industrial electricians will be in demand. With a shortage of qualified workers, the industrial sector needs workers to install, test, maintain, and repair industrial machines and equipment. Anticipated growth in the computer, telecommunications, and mobile technology sectors is expected to fuel the demand for software engineers and developers. Additionally, growth in sectors like machinery and equipment manufacturing could further drive that demand. Veterinarians are in high demand. Canada has only a few schools that train vets. Jobs for doctors, physician assistants, dentists, opticians, pharmacists, plumbers, pipe fitters and steam fitters, wholesale and manufacturing sales representatives, construction managers, laborers, first-line supervisors of construction trades and extraction workers, secondary school teachers, computer systems analysts will also be available. Some jobs are emerging in Canada that are related to cybersecurity, automation, and artificial intelligence. Environmental engineers will also be in demand. The most in-demand jobs in Canada during COVID-19 are licensed practical nurses, laborers in food, beverage, and associated products processing, home support workers, housekeepers and related occupations, comfort care aid in long-term care facilities, delivery drivers to support online orders and food delivery, retail store workers, social workers, medical laboratory technicians and pathologist assistants, as well as paramedical occupations. And we will have to see in future how these occupations continue to change and evolve.